Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. Today I'm filming my May wrap up. This is the second part of my May wrap up. I decided wisely, it turns out, to split it into two parts this month, and I'm so glad I did because I ended up reading 16 books this month, which is 3 more than I normally read, so I'm glad I've already covered half of them. I will link that video down below. I had a really good reading month on the whole. I had 2 2-star reads, 2 3-star reads, 2 3.5-star reads, 1 4.5-star read, and then 9 4-star reads. So 4 stars was by far my most popular rating, which is great because it did not get off to the best start. So I'm very glad this month picked up. I took part in the Mentalhealthathon, which was hosted by Nicole from A Beautiful Chaos of Books. I will link the Twitter down below. I had a fantastic time taking part in this. It kind of encouraged me to read a lot of books on my TBR that I've been putting off reading. I had some really good reads. Most of them were 4 stars for the readathon, which is fantastic. And I actually ended up doing all the challenges, which I'm really pleased about. I will link, I did a Twitter post if you want specifics on the challenges. I'm not going to go into all that now because I've got too many books to talk about. But I'll link that down below as well. So as I talk about these books, I'll mention if I read them as part of Mentalhealthathon as well. So the first book I'm going to talk about actually was DNF, and that is Major by Francesca Zappia. I was really disappointed by this book. I did read this as part of Mentalhealthathon. I did not give it a rating because it was a DNF. I skim read basically all of it, but there was a large section in the middle where it was literally me just flicking through the pages trying to get to the end of it. This is a book about a girl with schizophrenia, and essentially she has very vivid hallucinations, and it's a contemporary about her life, and she's trying to kind of sort out what is real and what isn't. And she had this incident when she was a child that she always thought was one of her hallucinations. However, she then meets a boy at her school who resembles the boy from that childhood event, and she's not sure if it's him or not. I think she ends up starting a romance with him. There was just something off about this. It had a really good start. I was intrigued by the first chapter, but the writing style was really, it didn't gel with me, and it also kind of had that contemporary thing where every character is kind of an asshole, and it's sort of part of the realness, I guess, of the contemporary, because they're all teenagers and they're all just assholes to each other. But I don't enjoy reading stories about that. I wasn't really rooting for her friendship or relationship with this guy because he wasn't particularly nice. No one else she interacted with was really nice, and like the mental health stuff, it wasn't necessarily portrayed badly, but it added a level of quirkiness which, combined with the writing style, I really didn't like. So sadly this was a DNF. Other people would probably really enjoy this, but it was not for me. The next book was an ARC. It comes out on the 10th of September, I believe, and it is The Years After You by Emma Woolf. This was not part of Mentalhealthathon, but it does kind of deal with themes of like loss and some other stuff as well. This was a 3 out of 5 for me. I debated giving it 3.5, but a couple of days after reading it I was like, no, it's definitely a 3. This is completely unlike everything I normally read. It's an adult contemporary, and it's not like a fluffy rom-com contemporary. It's more like a realistic look at relationships with a bit of a bleak side to it. The reason I picked this up is because I got on NetGalley they do this thing called Buzz Books, which you can just read, and it's loads of excerpts from books that are available on NetGalley for you to request. And I read an excerpt from this and I really enjoyed it. And to be fair, on the whole, this book is not a bad book. It is really enjoyable. It's just, it didn't do anything special with the concept for me. I thought it was quite a basic story. If I read more in this genre, I don't think I'd be particularly impressed by this. But this is essentially about a woman called, I can't remember her name, but there's one woman who is the other woman. She's like the mistress. She's a young 20-something, and she's sleeping with her older boss who is married, and you get chapters from the point of view of the mistress and also from the point of view of the wife. But the book kind of tapers off near the end, so it's really focused on the mistress. It is mainly her story, and the wife segments kind of don't really mean a lot on the whole. They do add depth to the story, they do make it longer, but it felt like they, especially near the end, they weren't really given as much focus as I thought they could be. I do have a blog post about this book and all arcs, so I'll link all my blog posts down below, so if you want to know more about a book you can check out those for more detail on why I did or didn't like it. That was my main problem really with this book, is that I don't think it did anything particularly groundbreaking, and it was very well written, but also it wasn't spectacular, so it just gets 3 out of 5. The next book really surprised me with how much I liked it, and that is Broken Things by Lauren Oliver. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This gets very, very low ratings on Goodreads, and in general it has not been well received by people on BookTube that I've seen. This is a kind of young adult contemporary thriller story about these 2 girls who were accused of murdering their best friend because of this story that they wrote together. So there was a childhood book that they all were obsessed with about these girls going to a magical world, and they wrote a fan fiction for this book, and in the fan fiction a character dies in a certain way and then their friend gets murdered in that way. So the press and everyone assumed that they were the killers. They weren't convicted of this, but they basically became pariahs in their town. One of them develops an kind of like a drug addiction and is in and out of rehab, sort of. And then the other one's been away. I can't remember if she's at a boarding school because I'm getting confused with another book I read. But I think she is at a boarding school or something, and then she comes back to the town. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed this. I wasn't expecting a lot from it, which maybe helped. I think the main problem people have with it is that it's not a thriller so much as it is. I mean, it has got thriller aspects. It is very much a young adult type thriller, which tend to lean more on the contemporary side anyway. But the mystery isn't the main focus the way it is with adult thrillers. And I just liked what it did. I really liked what it did with I thought the characters were really good. I liked what it did with the whole fanfiction aspect. It's got excerpts from the real book and the fanfiction. I liked it as a character development of these 3 people. I even thought the ending was quite strong. It wasn't necessarily the best resolution to a thriller ever, but for what it was, I thought it was really enjoyable. So yeah, this is getting absolutely wrecked by people, and I think, yeah, I can only assume it is because of the type of way it is marketed maybe, and the way that it actually is, but I really enjoyed it and I'm very glad I read it. It's the first Lauren Oliver book that I've enjoyed for a while, so I'm glad. The next book I read was Let Me Lie by Clare Mackintosh. This is an adult thriller. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars as well, and I did read this as part of Mentalhealthathon. It's got borderline personality disorder up in it, which from straight off that was handled really well. I really liked how they did that. This was a really solid thriller. I really liked the writing style. I think that was the main strength of it, and also the characters. I did see every twist coming. I wasn't particularly surprised by anything. I worked out something very early on, and the other thing was kind of, I worked out by process of elimination by the time the ending ended up happening. But yeah, I still really enjoyed this. I wasn't necessarily disappointed by the fact I managed to guess what happened. It didn't ruin the book for me because the writing was so strong and it was a really good story anyway. I've heard mixed things about Clare Mackintosh. I know one of her books is almost universally loved, and then I forget which one of the other ones is usually disliked. So I'm not sure if this is one of her best ones or one of her worst ones, but either way I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to read the other ones by her that I've got on my TBR that I've been putting off. The next book sadly was another 2-star read, and that was The House of Phobos by Scott Roche. This is a horror anthology of short stories. It's a really, really short anthology. It was like 100 and something pages on my Kindle. I got it on Kindle Unlimited, and I got it because the concept of the anthology is that each story is based around common phobias, which I thought was a really cool idea. And I was hoping it would go towards Mentalhealthathon, but it doesn't actually feature any characters with phobias or anything, so I decided it didn't count. This was also very disappointing. I gave it 2 stars because none of the stories really left any kind of impact on me whatsoever. The first one was probably the best one, and I was like, okay, this is quite good. It's not doing anything groundbreaking, but it's a decent little horror story. And unfortunately that was the best one, so then all of the others kind of ranged from I don't really know what's going on in this, it's not very clear, to I didn't really enjoy that, it was kind of basic. And yeah, it's just such a shame because it has such a strong premise, but the writing just wasn't there to support that premise. And also it didn't really focus on that many common phobias. Like, there was one about spiders, which makes sense, there was one about the dark, kind of, which is one of the ones I didn't quite get. And yeah, I've just read better horror anthologies, so sadly I could not recommend this. The next book was A Little in Line by Brandy Colbert. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This is a contemporary. I did read this for Mentalhealthathon. This has got bipolar rep, intersectional rep, a couple of other things as well. This is the one that I got confused with Broken Things because they both feature characters having female-female relationships whilst they're away from home, I think. You know, I've read like 3 or 4 books this month that have female-female relationships under very similar circumstances, so they're all a bit muddled now in my head, I'm afraid, but this one, I definitely remember. This one's great. So this is about 2 siblings. One is Little, one is Lion. Their nicknames for each other, and it's basically a brother and a sister. They are a step brother and sister, and she has just been away at boarding school where she's had a female-female relationship, and then he has been home. He's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She comes back from the school, and it's basically about her trying to resolve her relationship with her brother, which has got a bit of a rift in it now because she's been away. It's about her dealing with her sexuality. She's very attracted to a male neighbour, and then there's also a girl on the scene who she's very attracted to and her brother is very attracted to, so there's that aspect to it. There's a lot of stuff about her coming to terms with her religion as well. She's Jewish, and she hasn't been practicing while she's been away because she was already enough of a outsider to that community. It's a really good contemporary book. It crams a lot into it and it deals with it all really well. It's a really interesting story. Characters are fantastic, they're really strong. I'm not really remembering the ending at the moment, which is kind of a problem. I believe it was a good ending. I feel like there was something I had an issue with regards to the ending, but I can't quite remember what it was, so it probably wasn't a massive problem. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I definitely recommend it if you like that kind of contemporary, if you want more stories about mental health or anything like that. It deals with everything really well, and it was just really enjoyable. I would definitely read more by the author. The next book was another arc, and that was Mother Knows Best by Peikoff. Yeah, Peikoff. This comes out in September again, and this is a thriller with a kind of very, very loose sci-fi twist to it. So basically the premise is that there were these 2 scientists, and there was this woman who did not want to have another child because she could pass on her genetic condition to that child, and she already had a child who died because of that genetic condition. However, her husband really, really wants to have another baby, so she reaches out to this scientist because she knows that he's been doing embryo research and that he can theoretically create a child with 3 parents, so they could edit her embryo so that the genetic illness will not be passed on, and then that child would have 2 mothers and a father. So she seeks him out, does not tell her husband about it because he does not, he's not into that kind of science. He's written very political articles about embryo research and stuff like that and how it's not okay. And then the DNA of the other woman that they use is his research assistant, who is also a scientist, and she is very much driven by research, and she's also in love with the head scientist. I'm really not explaining this very well, it's kind of a lot of details. This is like the backstory to the plot, and then the plot is told in two halves, so it's told in the past and in the present day, and in the present day it's told from the point of view of the daughter who has been born and exists, and she's like 11 years old, and she has no idea that she has genetically 3 parents. And then in the past it's about them setting up this research project and doing the embryo stuff and all of that. This is a really, really good thriller. I definitely recommend it. It was so unlike anything I'd ever read before. It's not necessarily high on the thriller concept, so there's not loads of twists and turns. There's some stuff that happens, but it's not a kind of really intense thriller where everything's happening every couple of pages and you don't know what's going on. It's more straightforward than that, but it's stronger for it. It's got really good characterization. And yeah, the author has a master's degree in bioethics, and that really shows because you can just see the amount of research that she's put in and effort, and the scientists are written so well. And yeah, it was a really good thriller. I definitely recommend checking it out when it's released. It's, like I said, just for the sheer uniqueness of a story like that, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it raised some interesting questions, some interesting concepts. And it's not so much science fiction because it's stuff that can actually happen or could actually happen very soon. But yeah, I'm very excited to read more from this author. I'd be intrigued to see if she can do something else with a different concept, because the concept is so tied into her past, like her research history and stuff. But yeah, it's really good. The next book is It's Not Me, It's You by John Richardson. Gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think I'm going to do a separate video about this, so I'm not really going to talk about this now, but this is like a memoir. It's not really a memoir, it's kind of a story of a weekend in his life where he is doing a gig and also is trying to message someone that he fancies. And it's about, I did read this for Mentalhealthathon, it's about his OCD/OCPD symptoms. He's not diagnosed, but like his thought patterns in this book really clearly indicate that, you know, they're not the thought patterns of someone who is mentally healthy, shall we say. I think I'm going to do a separate video on this basically because I really, really identify with this book. I haven't read it for years, and I read it at a time in my life where I didn't know why my brain was the way it is. And now I do know why my brain is the way it is, and this is just... it's just so nice and also awful to read something that from someone who thinks basically the same you do, in an unhealthy way. So yeah, I am going to do a separate video on this because I've got complex feelings, but I love this book. Yeah, I recommend reading it. It's very funny, it's also very, very sad. It's not really intended to be sad, but yeah, I guess it's good because he's like married now and he's got a kid. He's kind of overcome all these relationship hang-ups that he talks about in this book, so it's a lot easier to read now than it was perhaps at the time. But yeah, it means a lot to me personally, so it's difficult for me to talk about it objectively. And the final book I'm talking about is 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This I finished literally about 10 minutes before midnight on the final day of the month because I was reading it for Mentalhealthathon, and I was so desperate to finish it and complete all the challenges. I listened to it mostly on audiobook, and then on the last day I did cave and I bought the ebook because I can read faster than I can listen, and I had like 4 hours left, which is 2 hours on double speed. There was like 100 pages, so I just bought it and read it. I did really enjoy this. I would like to read it again because I did listen to it on audiobook. There were several bits that I kind of missed or not really understood properly because I was listening to it while I was working. I was listening to it. Sometimes I'd fall asleep when I was listening to it because that just happens. But yeah, this is a fantasy story about a heist, essentially. So it's a group of criminals trying to complete this big job to get this money, and there's these beings with magic who are called Grisha, and they're heavily involved in the story, and it's like a fantasy world. There was a lot of concepts in this, which, again, actually listening to it on audiobook did help, because when I switched to reading it, reading the ebook, it became so much harder to digest all the kind of fantasy world terms and the names of people and places. It was much easier listening to it as an audiobook in some ways because I didn't have to think about, oh, what does that word mean, or how is it pronounced, because it was already pronounced for me in the audiobook. It's a really good audiobook. There is one narrator. It makes an interesting choice, which is that there's chapters narrated by different people, different characters, and they are also narrated by different people. So each character has a different narrator, but they all do the voices for the characters within their own narration, if that makes sense. So, for example, the character Kaz would have like 3 or 4 different voices because there's 3 or 4 different point of view narrators. So he sounded very different in between chapters, which is a little off-putting because the person who narrated Inej, I did not like her Kaz voice at all. I thought it took me out of the story a bit. It was a bit kind of too cartoonish. So that was a bit difficult to listen to. It was a bit of a weird experience. But yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it for a bit, read the book again, and then read the sequel, so I really know what's going on before I read the sequel. But I did really enjoy it. It's got some really cool stuff in it. It's obviously a really hyped book, and I do really want that beautiful collector's edition now. That is all of the books that I read in May. Do let me know if you've read any of these, as always, what your opinions are of them. If they're on your TBR, let me know if they're still on your TBR now, or if you think that maybe you wouldn't like them so much now you've heard me talk about them. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, it helps me out massively, and I hope to see you next time.